There is something almost frightening about a woman who can walk away, not because she is cold, not because she doesn't feel, but because in a world built on the assumption that people will chase, beg, and stay no matter how badly they are treated, she breaks the pattern completely. She is the exception nobody knows how to handle. Psychologists have studied this behavior for decades, and what they found changes the way you will see relationships, friendships, and even your own life forever. Because the woman who can walk away is not running from love. She is protecting something far more valuable than any relationship, any job, any approval from another human being. She is protecting her own sense of self. And that single trait, the ability to leave without looking back, is one of the most powerful psychological forces a human being can possess. It rewires how people treat you. It changes the balance of power in every interaction. It silences, manipulates, exposes liars, and forces the world to finally respect boundaries it once ignored. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Most people will never develop this ability, not because they lack strength, but because of something that happened long before they even understood what was happening to them. That something begins in childhood, and by the end of this video, you will understand exactly how it shaped you, whether you realize it or not. But stay with me here, because in about a minute, I am going to tell you the one moment that reveals whether a person can truly walk away or whether they are only pretending they can. And most people fail this test without even knowing it exists. Think about the people you know. Maybe you are one of them. The ones who stay in situations that hurt them long after the warning signs appeared. The friend who keeps forgiving the same betrayal. The partner who keeps waiting for someone to change. The employee who keeps tolerating disrespect because leaving feels impossible, even when staying feels unbearable. There is a reason this happens, and it has nothing to do with weakness. It has to do with how the human brain was designed to survive. From the moment we are born, our nervous system is wired for one primary goal: attachment, not happiness, not fulfillment. Attachment. Because for a newborn baby, staying connected to a caregiver is a matter of life and death. If that connection breaks, the infant cannot survive. So the brain builds a deep, automatic alarm system that treats disconnection as danger. This system does not disappear when we grow up. It becomes the invisible architecture behind every relationship we form as adults. When someone we love pulls away, that ancient alarm goes off, and it does not care whether the person is good for us or not. It only cares about one thing: closing the distance. This is why so many people stay in relationships that are clearly unhealthy. It is not because they cannot see the red flags. It is because their nervous system is screaming that disconnection equals danger, even when the relationship is the actual danger. This is the trap, and it explains why walking away feels almost physically impossible for so many people, even when every rational part of their mind knows they should leave. Now, here is where it gets interesting. Not everyone experiences this alarm system with the same intensity. Some people, through their early experiences, developed what psychologists call a secure attachment style. Their caregivers were consistent, responsive, and emotionally present. As a result, their nervous system learned a powerful lesson early on. Connection is safe, but so is being alone. These are the people who grow into adults capable of walking away when something is wrong, not because they don't feel pain, but because their sense of safety does not depend entirely on another person's presence. But most people did not have that experience. Many grew up with caregivers who were inconsistent, sometimes warm, sometimes distant, sometimes overwhelmed. This creates what is known as an anxious attachment pattern, where a person's nervous system learns that love is unpredictable, so it must be chased, monitored, and protected at all costs. People with this pattern often become hyper-aware of small changes in someone's tone, a delayed text message, a shift in mood. Their bodies react as if a threat is present, because in their early experience, connection genuinely was unpredictable and something they had to fight for. And then there is a third pattern, avoidant attachment, where a person learns early on that depending on others leads to disappointment. So they build walls instead of asking for closeness. These people often appear to be the ones who can walk away easily. But this is where most people get the psychology completely wrong. Because walking away out of fear of closeness is not the same as walking away out of self respect. This is the difference almost nobody talks about, and it is the key to understanding real psychological power. A person with an avoidant pattern walks away to protect themselves from vulnerability. They leave before they can be hurt. It looks like strength from the outside, but internally it is often driven by fear disguised as independence. This is not the woman we are talking about today. The woman who can truly walk away is different. She is not avoiding intimacy. She is not afraid of closeness. She is fully capable of loving deeply, of being vulnerable, of investing herself completely into a relationship, a friendship, or a goal. But she has built something inside herself that most people never build, an internal locus of self worth. This means her sense of value does not come from whether someone else chooses her, it comes from within. And because of that, she can love completely without needing to be needed in order to feel whole. This is the psychological trait that changes everything. Because when your self worth depends on external validation, whether from a partner, a friend, or an employer, you become predictable. People can sense when someone needs them more than they need themselves. And whether consciously or not, some people will exploit that need. They will push boundaries slightly further, knowing you likely won't leave. They will delay commitment, knowing you'll keep waiting. They will disrespect small things first, testing how much you'll tolerate before ever attempting something larger. But the woman with a strong internal sense of worth sends an entirely different signal. Her calm is not indifference, it is calibration. She is constantly, quietly assessing whether this relationship, this friendship, this situation is adding value to her life or draining it. And the moment the answer becomes clear that it is draining her, something remarkable happens. She does not argue. She does not beg. She does not create dramatic scenes trying to force someone to see her value. She simply, calmly removes herself. And this is where the psychological power becomes almost impossible to ignore. Because human beings, at a subconscious level, place enormous value on things they might lose. This is called loss aversion, one of the most well-documented principles in behavioral psychology. Our brains are wired to fear loss roughly twice as intensely as we feel pleasure from an equivalent gain. This means the threat of losing something automatically increases its perceived value, regardless of how that thing was treated while it was present. This is why people so often fail to appreciate someone until that person is gone. It is not poetic irony, it is neuroscience. The human brain simply does not calculate value accurately until scarcity enters the equation. And the woman who can walk away, whether she realizes it or not, activates this exact psychological mechanism, not through manipulation, not through games, but through something far more powerful, genuine self-respect. Here is what almost nobody tells you, though, and it is important you understand this part clearly, because it separates real psychological strength from manufactured behavior. If a person walks away purely as a strategy, hoping it will trigger someone else's fear of loss and pull them back, it usually fails. Because manipulation carries an emotional undertone that people, even subconsciously, can sense. There is desperation hidden inside the performance. And desperation, no matter how well disguised, repels rather than attracts. The woman who truly walks away is not performing. She is not waiting by the door hoping to be chased. In fact, in many cases, she has already emotionally released the outcome entirely. She walks away because staying no longer aligns with what she has decided she deserves. And paradoxically, it is this total lack of performance, this genuine detachment from needing a specific result, that makes her presence so powerful in the first place. This connects to a concept in psychology called the scarcity principle, first extensively documented by researchers studying influence and persuasion. Human beings assign higher value to things that are limited, rare, or not guaranteed. When someone is always available, always forgiving, always willing to accept less than they deserve, they unintentionally signal abundance. Their presence feels guaranteed, so the brain stops actively valuing it. But when someone demonstrates through consistent action rather than empty words that their time, energy, and presence are not unconditional, something shifts. The brain recalibrates. What once felt guaranteed suddenly feels valuable again. Let's pause here for a moment because I want you to think about your own life. Think about a time you gave everything to someone, a friend, a partner, even a job, and the more you gave, the less it seemed to matter. And then think about a time you finally stepped back, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion or self preservation. What happened? For many people watching this right now, that moment of stepping back was the first time they were truly seen. Not because stepping back was a trick, but because it revealed the truth that had been hidden underneath constant availability. That this person had value all along, value that was simply being overlooked because it was never questioned. This pattern shows up everywhere, not just in romantic relationships. Think about friendships where one person always initiates contact, always shows up, always remembers important dates, while the other person barely reciprocates. Over time, the person who gives more often begins to feel invisible, taken for granted, replaceable. And this happens gradually, so gradually that most people don't notice it happening until they feel completely depleted. Think about workplaces where employees who are the most agreeable, the most willing to take on extra work without complaint, the most eager to please, are often the ones overlooked for promotions or respect. Meanwhile, colleagues who set clear boundaries, who are willing to say no, who demonstrate that their time has limits, are frequently treated with more consideration. This is not because boundaries make someone more talented. It is because boundaries signal self-value, and human beings instinctively calibrate their treatment of others based on the value that person visibly places on themselves. This is one of the most important psychological truths you will ever learn. People treat you based on the standard you demonstrate, not the standard you explain. You can tell someone exactly how you deserve to be treated 100 times, and it will have far less impact than a single instance of you actually enforcing that standard through action. Words describe expectations, actions enforce them, and nothing communicates a boundary more clearly than someone calmly walking away when that boundary is crossed. Now, I want to address something important because this psychology can easily be misunderstood. Walking away is not about punishing someone. It is not a manipulation tactic disguised as self-respect. Real psychological strength is not about controlling another person's behavior through absence. It's the opposite. It's about releasing the need to control anything at all, including the outcome. The woman who can walk away is not thinking, if I leave, they will chase me. She is thinking, I no longer need this to survive emotionally. And that internal shift from needing someone to simply valuing them if they choose to show up authentically is the entire foundation of this psychological power. This is also why so many people who attempt to fake this behavior fail. They read about it, they hear about it, and they try to perform detachment as a strategy. But underneath, the desperation remains, hidden just below the surface, waiting to leak out the moment things don't go as planned. Real detachment cannot be faked convincingly for long because it is not a behavior. It is the natural outward expression of an internal state, a state built over time through healing, self-awareness, and a genuine relationship with one's own worth. So how does someone actually build this? Because I know many of you watching this are asking that exact question right now. How do I become the kind of person who can genuinely walk away, not out of coldness, but out of real self-respect? It begins with something most people avoid entirely, sitting with discomfort instead of immediately trying to escape it through reassurance seeking. When that ancient nervous system alarm goes off, the urge to text again, to explain yourself again, to fix things immediately is powerful. But every time you act on that urge purely out of anxiety rather than genuine choice, you reinforce the belief that you cannot tolerate distance, that disconnection truly is dangerous. Learning to sit with that discomfort, to breathe through it, to remind yourself that discomfort is not the same as danger, is one of the most important psychological skills a person can develop. It also requires building a life that exists independently of any single relationship. This does not mean pretending you don't need people. Human beings are deeply social creatures, and connection is a genuine biological need, not a weakness. But there is a difference between needing connection in general and needing one specific person or situation to feel whole. The woman who can walk away typically has multiple sources of meaning in her life: her own goals, her friendships, her interests, her sense of personal growth. When one relationship no longer serves her, she is not left with nothing. She still has an entire life waiting for her on the other side of that decision. This is perhaps the most practical insight in this entire video, so listen closely. If leaving any single relationship, friendship, or job would completely collapse your sense of identity, that is the clearest sign that too much of your self-worth has been placed into something external. Rebuilding that internal foundation takes time. It often requires reconnecting with parts of yourself that were slowly abandoned while you were busy trying to keep someone else happy. Hobbies you gave up, friendships you let fade, goals you postponed indefinitely. Reclaiming these pieces is not selfish. It is the exact process required to become someone who can walk into any relationship from a place of wholeness rather than desperation. There is also a deeper psychological layer here worth understanding: the concept of self-concept clarity. Research in personality psychology has consistently shown that people with a clear, stable sense of who they are, their values, their standards, their non-negotiables, experience significantly less anxiety in relationships and make decisions more confidently during conflict. When you know exactly what you stand for, someone else's disapproval or distance becomes far less threatening because your identity was never dependent on their approval in the first place. Compare this to someone whose self-concept is unclear or unstable, someone who has spent years adapting themselves to whoever they are with, changing opinions, suppressing needs, minimizing their own preferences in order to avoid conflict. For this person, walking away feels almost impossible, not because the relationship is good, but because they have lost touch with who they even are outside of it. Leaving would not just mean losing another person. It would mean confronting an unsettling emptiness where a clear identity should be. This is why the ability to walk away is ultimately not about the other person at all. It was never really about them. It is about the relationship you have with yourself. Every time you tolerate something below your standard, you are teaching your own nervous system that your boundaries are negotiable. And every time you honor a boundary, even when it is painful, even when it means losing something you wanted, you are teaching yourself the opposite: that your standards are real and that you are someone worth protecting. This brings us to another critical psychological concept: the difference between abandonment and self-preservation. Many people confuse walking away with abandoning someone, and this confusion keeps them trapped in situations far longer than they should stay. But there is a profound difference between abandoning someone in a moment of genuine need, through struggle, illness, or hardship, and walking away from a pattern of disrespect, dishonesty, or neglect that shows no sign of changing despite repeated communication. The first is abandonment. The second is self-preservation. And confusing the two is one of the most common ways people convince themselves to endure treatment they should never have accepted in the first place. Let's talk about something practical here, because this is where the psychology becomes real life application. How do you actually know when it's time to walk away versus when it's time to keep working through a difficult period? Psychologists who study relationship dynamics often point to a simple but powerful distinction. Is this a problem or is this a pattern? A problem is something that happens, gets acknowledged, and is genuinely worked through with visible change over time. A pattern is something that keeps repeating, gets apologized for repeatedly, but never actually changes, no matter how many conversations happen. If you find yourself having the same conversation about the same issue for the third, fifth, or 10th time, with promises of change that never materialize into consistent action, that is not a problem anymore. That is a pattern. And patterns, by definition, do not resolve themselves through more patience. They resolve through either a genuine, demonstrated shift in behavior or through your decision to walk away. Here's a question worth asking yourself honestly. Are you afraid to leave because you truly believe things will get better based on actual evidence of change? Or are you afraid to leave because leaving feels unfamiliar, uncomfortable, or simply frightening in a way that has nothing to do with the actual relationship itself? This distinction matters enormously because the first reason is based on realistic hope. The second reason is based on fear of the unknown. And fear of the unknown should never be the primary reason you stay somewhere that is hurting you. I want to bring this back to something deeply human because psychology can sometimes feel abstract, detached from the lived reality of pain. Imagine someone who has spent years pouring themselves into a relationship, showing up again and again, forgiving repeatedly, hoping that enough love, enough patience, enough effort would eventually be met with the same energy in return. And imagine the exhaustion that eventually sets in, not sudden, but slow, accumulating quietly over months or years until one day there is simply nothing left to give. That exhaustion is not weakness, it is data. It is your own psychology trying desperately to tell you something your conscious mind has been avoiding. That this dynamic is unsustainable and continuing down this path will cost you more than you can afford to lose, specifically yourself. The woman who can walk away has learned to listen to that exhaustion before it completely consumes her. She has learned that love, real love, should not require the abandonment of her own needs, her own boundaries, her own identity. She understands that giving endlessly to someone who does not reciprocate is not romantic. It is depleting, and she has made peace with an uncomfortable but liberating truth that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and even for the other person is to stop trying to force a connection that has already run its course. This does not mean she becomes cold or closed off to future relationships. In fact, the opposite tends to be true. People who have done this internal work, who have learned to walk away when necessary, often become more capable of deep, healthy intimacy afterward, not less, because they no longer enter relationships from a place of fear, trying to avoid abandonment at all costs. They enter from a place of choice, fully aware that they could walk away if needed, but choosing to stay because the relationship genuinely deserves their presence. And there is a profound difference between staying because you're afraid to leave and staying because you have evaluated the relationship honestly and decided it is worth the investment. This is ultimately what makes this psychological trait so powerful and so misunderstood. It is not about being unattainable or playing hard to get. It is not a manipulation tactic borrowed from outdated relationship advice. It is the natural result of genuine self-respect, built slowly, sometimes painfully, through the process of learning your own worth independent of anyone else's validation. And once that internal foundation is built, walking away stops being a dramatic act of defiance. It becomes simply what happens naturally when something no longer aligns with the life you've decided you deserve. If you are watching this and recognizing pieces of your own life in these words, maybe a relationship you've stayed in far longer than you should have, maybe a pattern of prioritizing everyone else's needs over your own, I want you to understand something important. Building this kind of internal strength does not happen overnight, and it is not about becoming someone who no longer feels pain, fear, or attachment. It is about learning slowly to trust yourself enough to make difficult decisions, even when your nervous system is screaming at you to stay. It is about understanding that discomfort in the short term is often the price of long-term self-respect. And that price, while difficult, is almost always worth paying. So here's my question for you, and I genuinely want to know the answer. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you finally walked away from someone or something and it completely changed how you saw your own worth? What happened and what did you learn from it? Write it in the comments below because your story might be exactly what someone else watching this needs to hear today.